being able to recognize what's happening left and right of our industry and not just having our blinders down on tech in the industry, it's super key, especially for executives in the group. Getting an understanding of this industry is really, really challenging. And as Matt said, whenever you start gathering a group of people to talk about technology, the tendency is to start splashing in the term future. It's splashed all over all that media that Matt was talking about for this event, disruption. When I talk to executives, and a lot of, this is the target audience for this group for this week, and if you haven't looked at this, this is going to be a dense 48 hours for you guys. So I highly recommend, if you're drinking white or red wine, go back and get a stiffer beverage really quick. This stuff is going to be juicy and meaty. And the reason why I'm going to do it as a sprint, I'm going to actually be very schizophrenic about it. Predicting the future is a fool's errand. Talking about disruption, I'll actually focus on that word quite a bit tonight because I think that's even evolving. And for executives that aren't running picks and clicks, you're really needing a different framing, a different lens to look at what's going on. Complexity is, and volatility is being, in the market, is being aggravated by the variables of technology that are being dumped at it. And this agenda is a fantastic testament to that. So I actually want to start by kind of the art of economics and simplifying what's actually happening. I Google trended the word disruption last week before I threw it in this slide. And if you look at it, it had a kind of funny little life cycle. Boomed around 2010, boomed again around 2011, and now it's just kind of rising in the everyday lexicon. I wanted to focus on those peaks. I've had a wonderful opportunity to speak about technology to so many executives globally. And I remember specifically in 2011 talking about disruption. I remember specifically an executive in 2011 basically just pumping the brakes really quick with this phrase right here. And it really staggered me there. I was just, it's not resonating. This notion and this sense of urgency around the term disruption. You don't know my workforce. And it's really strange because if you kind of, like I said, get schizophrenic about technology and disruption, it's always been here. First, second century, technology in the days of the Pantheon was ultra lightweight concrete. And it stands to this day the largest unsupported concrete dome. You think in the time of Caesar, these guys weren't talking about disruption when they talked about this project? Interestingly enough, if you fast forward to today, and you guys as executives, if I think about your day job of running your business, taking care of your employees, and trying to create a sustainable business, and in this time of complexity and volatility, you guys have forces that are acting on you that have nothing to do with what you're able to control. These mega trends of what's happening globally are staggering. It's just these points of acceleration are taking off on so many dimensions if you want to start talking about disruption. If you talk about population dynamics, this explosion of people, and look at us on that dotted line in the developed world. The other dynamic of this massive urbanization, we're projecting by about 2025, 2030, somewhere we've got 9 billion people on the planet sharing 600 cities. That's serious stress to our industry. If you look at what's going on with that growth, we're almost going to double in size in 15 years as an industry. And a lot of that, if you look at this year alone, the last 12 months, we hit a tipping point. 50% of construction here in the developed world, the other 50% accelerating out of emerging economies. We're going to start taking a back seat. And it's going to be interesting to see what's happening overseas that's going to disrupt you, and you didn't even know you're competing against it. If you look at this kind of in first principles, and I'm going to make a lot of people vomit by reflecting back to your freshman or sophomore year in economics, the conversations about these megatrends are really shifts of the demand curve. They're demand that you don't even see today in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. They're not movements up and down from equilibrium or disruptions from the way that we work. What about the supply side? If I held up a mirror to you guys, designers and contractors that operate in our industry, I actually see a bunch of extreme sports athletes. Wade Simmons, professional mountain biker at Red Bull Rampage, Utah for the last, 4 or 5 years. He's a very risky dude This looks very scary to a lot of us. This is second nature to him because he's lived and breathed, and he has this ability to spot his landings. He's visualized this process over and over again, and you guys are extreme athletes as well because this is the definition of risk. What your mind's eye see, your inability to predict the future, the differences between plan, design intent versus the actual performance, that variation, that's risk. And that's really interesting because if we talk about this industry on the dimensions of risk alone, we are a high-risk industry operating on a wonderfully low-margin budget. If you look at how we even start off the process, we race to the bottom with aggressive bidding, and then we stress the supply chain by procuring the hell out of these guys. And already they're taxed because from a population standpoint, those demographics, that population boom isn't being seen in construction. Hip kids want to go into gaming. They don't want to come here. And the worst statistic that we have in a diminishing population is it's right about closing time right now. And we lost 3 guys today. And I have to fact check this statistic from the Bureau of Labor, OSHA and the Bureau of Labor Statistics every time I say this because it's staggering. We are a developed economy. Look at how sophisticated we are, and we still lost 3 guys today. It's really staggering. So if I talk about shifts in demand, shifts in supply, and technology at its heart, let's go back to college real quick. You know, these notions of productivity that bump that the supply side, what can you guys do to make a step change in your business and as an industry? You'll actually find technology right there in freshman or sophomore year economics. It's rooted right next to all the other forms of capital, human and physical capital, the inputs that we can drive productivity and move the supply side equation. I'll give you a couple good examples because you still don't believe me. You're doing it at the pump already, right now, digesting the benefits of a supply shock driven by technology. This year, the price of oil per barrel dropped cheaper than the price of the barrel itself. Thank you, technology. You don't think? Talk to somebody in Houston about technology and disruption right now. Extremely painful. This month alone, you read Harvard Business Review. You talk about evolving technology from point products to platforms, their importance on weaving it into strategy, blah, 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 blah. They gave me this inequality. Equity markets valued Uber greater than the market cap of GM. You don't think GM thinks there's a supply shock in technology right now? How are they missing it? You know, so when I put up this guy, there's guys, everyone's going to start giggling because you know what I think about disruption? It's everywhere. Look at the graph. It's the new normal. It's every perspective. So this is the challenge when you talk about disruption. Talking about novel technology, it's dense. You guys have a just meaty 48 hours. We started looking at disruption kind of more on the dimensions. And this is kind of that lens that I'm trying to sprint and give to you, the primer for the rest of the week. I could have given you a 30-minute advertisement for Autodesk, but we decided to go a different route on it. So you're welcome, Nate. So let's talk about these 3 lenses for disruption, and maybe it's a useful template to digest, 20, 30 different presentations. So for production, let's talk about that, the means of production. You know, this anytime, anywhere, any device language that I was using at 2011 was a touch too early. It was marketing speak. It was, the running joke was, what was your cloud strategy in 2010, 2011? And a lot of you are smirking. But the funny thing about it is the Pope knows disruption. That CEO was seeing 2005 in his workforce. He wasn't seeing 2016. Just 4 years. These are just 4 years of movement here. If you look at the apps and mobility, it should raise a massive yawn in this crowd already. They're not just tools and a digital hammer, however. They're changing kind of the face and interplay of that disconnected intelligence I have in the trenches versus my general at home. And that's the difference there. So when we talk about these apps and the data that we're sending, it's almost as important, if not arguably important, the read we're getting back. And I think that's a big signal on the changes of production. Here's a wonderful opportunity to disrupt. Speaking of 2011, I was standing on the museum's roof of the World Trade Center, looking down on the pit of Tower 7. This is collateral damage. Thank you, 2001. No one talks about Tower 7. And this is the challenge of, the feed and read. Not even in 2011, here we are giving basically what we gave Pantheon workers. And you're supposed to have these guys execute. A designer is supposed to feed, a construction team is supposed to feed a trade, and somehow they understand scope, they understand how to execute an X, Y, and Z, and no one told them that they're going to be 8 stories below ground. Put a number on it. Cost and time. The funny thing is, this trend of connecting design, letting it evolve, able to consume, and then drive connected hardware is another theme that you're seeing. If I simplify it for one of those lenses that I'm hoping you're seeing, convergence is king. It's what's providing all this pressure. No one wants to admit it. We're all frickin' overwhelmed by it. It's because there's a multiplier effect that's just happening every day. 1 + 1 = 8. And that's what's happening. You add a little bit of model, you add a little bit of mobility. Thank you, surveying instrument. Boom. I've got a totally different workflow. And tomorrow we'll just go make another one. And it's ripe, and we need to disrupt. So convergence is happening in methodology as much as it is technology. We'll beg, borrow, and steal manufacturing principles because we've all seen that graph. Here's some friends of ours, the Broad Construction Group. A lot of you guys gasped at this YouTube video when you saw it. The left side is Daunting Lake, 30 stories in 15 days on site. Last year with Changsha, they gave me 27 more stories and 4 more days of construction time on site. And a lot of the chatter, if you read the comments below, well, that's going to scare the crap out of me. I'd never get a room in that hotel. 9 times more earthquake resistant, 20 times cleaner air. It's actually the best building in the city. So if you look on executing on quality, Dr. Kushnivas, thank God for this guy. At the end of the week, he's going to close this thing down. 3 years ago, he steps up at Autodesk University, introduces us to the world of contour crafting. A funny thing happened. Look at the multiplier effect here. A funny thing happened. A couple months later, you see the WinSun Group, some of his grad students pop up in China. They start printing 2,400 square feet of low-income housing in China a day. What happened with Dr. Kushnivas that summer? Congress asked him to start explaining how we're going to build structures on the moon so that when we arrive, we have somewhere to go. Hopefully he talks about that. The funny thing about those kids in China, they started doing premier condos with the same methodologies. When I talked about manufacturing or modular construction, you guys think I was going to talk about another bathroom pod? If you look at our friends from Thornton Tomasetti that'll speak tomorrow or the next day, look at the evolutions that they went through. Right out this door, you can look and see Millennial Park, one of the earlier, and also Soldier Field, one of the earlier model-based handoffs from design to construction, 2003, 2004. Accelerate to today, go to Abu Dhabi. They have an entire wing of the Museum of the Future that they're going to print. If you look at this evolution, it does not stop. Our friends at MX3D is taking some of these same concepts, digital to physical, and free-forming this stuff. And this is totally crazy. In the Netherlands, they're already prototyping pedestrian bridges over canals that aren't only 3D printed, they're self-assembled by the equipment. This is being prototyped in real time. This is a compounding factor that should just blow the mind. This is still our industry. If you then kind of take a little step back. Well, we won't focus on production so much. Let's focus on the product. What are we delivering? This is where you need a different lens. I talked about anytime, anywhere, any device, and kind of that pushback in 2011. I think I was right. This one's kind of funny. And this is something that we're coaching a lot of people. Computing is not scarce. And I can't stress this enough. In 2011, when we started talking about this, even I laughed at statements like infinite computing. But walk through this one with me. So right now, instead of the little laptop that's buried in the podium, I've got basically a computing problem. It takes me about 10,000 seconds. That's roughly about 3 hours. A 3-hour computing problem may look like, a rendering an advanced rendering that you may give for an architect or run a simulation or something. 3 hours of processing time, that's going to cost me about 25 cents of that laptop. The interesting thing is now the business model, the economics of it is, I can give that same problem 10,000 seconds across 10,000 machines over that 1 second. That access to that computing still only cost me 25 cents. Is that a supply shock? The funny thing is, if you really want to understand what that is, let's look at what that could be. 10,000 machines in 1 second. This is my buddy Churro. 7 photographs in 2012 I took from my iPhone and pushed it up to one of these prototype apps that we had for photogrammetry. What is that, you ask? Well, it's just all it is a probability algorithm. Within a 5-minute round trip, it was already calculating where was I when I snapped those 7 photographs. And when it locates where I was with the phone, it sprays 3 million pixels at each other until they all intersect and gives you back a mesh. This is what the computer sees versus you thinking you're looking at my dog. It's 3 million pixels intersecting picture by picture by picture and gives me shapes. This is a picture of Tatiana in November of the same year. I'm sneaking a photograph from my own frickin' meeting. Because what was she doing? She was looking at World Heritage efforts that we could use the same technology. She was talking about in November 2014, this effort that we were partnering with the Smithsonian. They have a problem. More of their artifacts, 50, 60 times what they can actually display in the 7 centers of the Smithsonian DC are actually below ground. I snapped that photograph because she showed us this, the face of Lincoln upon death. I was watching every wrinkle and the eyebrow hair of Lincoln because she used the same technology to capture something that nobody gets to see. She put it up on the web. I asked Tatiana, what would you do if you were speaking to everybody this week, these execs? She said, take them to Afghanistan. The Bamyan Buddhist monks, or the Buddhist statues that you guys may remember from 2001 before the news overshadowed this, destroyed by the Taliban in less than a second. And so if you look at, that was a 1,000-year statue in a second. And of course it's senseless. But if you ask Tatiana what she did with her World Heritage little algorithm, she started looking for source material in the oddest of places. Google Images, Facebook, Flickr. And she dates it back to about 1963. She starts finding the first usable photographs to pump into her algorithm. And you fast forward to today, much like Lincoln's face that you've only seen in artistic rendering, she can actually get you up to the face of that Buddha and completely recreate this. Huge humanitarian win for Tatiana. I love this story, but is this technology that's driving World Heritage, or is this inside your drone? Or is your drone having access to this computing power? That compounding effect that you think is just a battle with the FAA right now is really being influenced by so many different things. That's 7 photographs in a dog, right? Or 189 photographs in, of course, your next project. What I love about this is it's not just once, it's many. So if the economics are the same, one machine, 10,000 seconds, or 10,000 seconds in 1 second, why not do it all the time? We talked about reality capture, early generation laser scanning, as if it was a scarce resource. It was expensive, I needed a specialist, the files are big and heavy, my machine can't even process it. And now look what we're doing with it. I mean, it is great that 40% of drone use is actually coming out of construction right now. I love the fact that we're actually leading an industry adoption of something for once and not being seen as black sheep. But look at this. Because we can scan every day, because we can do automated flight paths, thanks to our friends at Skycatch that'll be speaking the next day, we're actually moving from scarce capture to real-time performance monitoring. Do it daily. Do it multiple times a day. Start looking at the amount of product that you're moving around these pits with Black & Veatch in this Rio Tinto mine. You're actually now monitoring productivity. That funny little lens from economics earlier that's shifting supply curves. And it just compounds itself. So now we can bring the site into the user, same file, 1 year, 1 generational shift, putting those same engines on the desktop, that's fluid. If you look at a small contractor based out of Miami, not our most sophisticated user, they just embraced it. A terabyte costs me about 55 to 60 bucks at Computer City right now, Office Depot. This guy is like, okay, it costs me a gig, 2 gigs per file. I'll do it a day, every day. I got 100 of them on a terabyte. Plan versus perform. This is a clash-free model, but as soon as I put in what got scanned today, there's a clash. And it didn't happen with my BIM guy. It changes everything. So if I'm focusing on the product, we're talking about smart cities. We're talking about all kinds of different things, the intelligence that we have with an Internet of Things that our friends from Microsoft will be talking about this week. This changes the game. You know, this notion of a BIM execution plan or collaboration or integrated project delivery, fine-tuning the demands with your client, we're all complicit now to make this thing sing when a user steps in. Whether or not it's the content that you create and design, what information you're curating and filtering back out for that operator, we all have totally different stressors on what's expected of us. And it's beautiful. I mean, the sensor world is hilarious to watch because it's so cheap. That means the threshold for a new entrant is very low. You know, we're seeing a small group, a startup out of Israel called Panoramic Power, create these funny little Wi-Fi devices. I can go into a 100-year-old building or a building that lets 2 years from now. I can clamp to every circuit, every device. It's pinging wirelessly. It's phoning home. That thing's powered wirelessly, which is crazy in of itself. And instantly, I got a smart building. We can take 1890s, this Chicago Athletic Association, and smart it up with a footprint of 2 guys in about 24 to 48 hours. And we could be pinging that light right there and talking about consumption. Is it on? Is it off? Getting that insight, that intel, that's actually what's our last lens of demand. The demand side of the equation, what our clients are looking for. If you look at it from a kind of the megatrend view, smart cities, highly efficient, extremely connected, you know, most modern infrastructure, demand curve, what we end up supplying, these are massive shifts to the right. If you look at expectations, another funny term from freshman economics, it's being driven by a guy that used to wear a black turtleneck in the consumer industry. And you guys know exactly what I mean. They expect it to work. You have totally different expectations on how you deliver. Let me give you a small, intimate look at Autodesk in one slide. And it's not meant to be an advertisement, so if it comes across that way, I horribly apologize. Let's talk about disruption. Top line, 30-year arc of Autodesk plus minus that makes us a dinosaur in technology. You launch AutoCAD in roughly 82, it didn't care what you were trying to draw. Platform, industry neutral. You fast forward to the 90s, price of PCs dropped dramatically. Bill Gates makes it cute and cuddly instead of a command prompt. Everybody gets a desktop computer. You have to start making software specific for a user. Now I can stick my hand out in ones and zeros and bombarding it right now. So I have to figure out how to manage it in 2016. That's a 30-plus year arc that gets us about, roughly this day, 14 million professional customers. Really healthy business being able to service these industries. If you look at the bottom line, it's about a 5-year arc. 2011, we started talking about anywhere, anytime, any device, that first app that we hit. You fast forward to today, we have 350 some odd apps, 3 different app stores, iOS, Google Play, Microsoft. We've accelerated to about 350 million users. That's disruption. I mean, when we talk about disruption, you've got a bunch of guys with an Autodesk.com email scrambling around trying to figure out how to deal with all that stuff. Inbound demand, what are we supplying? When I have this conversation, the most interesting audience that I get to speak to, besides you guys, this collection of executives, is arguably these guys. Once a year, I get to speak to some friends in an inner city school, and I get to hijack the math, science, and technology curriculum for a day. And you got to think about what this school is. Inner city charter school, you can basically translate that into challenging population, student population, you know, supply and demand, challenging curriculum. There's not a single book in the room because they don't have the funds for it. Every night, every teacher builds that curriculum from scratch. So I offer to throw about, I don't know, a couple $1 million worth of marketing at them for about 4 hours. And I use this example because it starts to give you a sense of demand. And so I'm cheating here when I use this slide with those kids, because I'm trying to show them something that's kind of interesting. Topic is normally systems thinking. Back when we were in school, we used to sing a song, the calf bone is connected to the knee bone. I can actually use some other things these days. And so our media and entertainment team is funny. They help me out. They help me show a rig. I can map the form of what this girl looks like to how she's going to operate. I can actually teach them about libraries of motion. We can start teaching our little rig how to do a cartwheel. I actually can calm the class down in the first 10, 15 minutes and get them to listen to some weird guy that came in off the street. But it's interesting. So I will brag about Autodesk for this one slide. The super cool thing, and sorry this video is not serving up, we have about a 20-year history of winning an Academy Award for visual effects. And what's really cool about that is that we've gotten to see some of those convergence dynamics that we haven't seen. You guys got to walk in. There's a VR set going on outside that you guys will experience. You guys can kind of see where this is going. This is the same thing. 1995's Toy Story, or a couple years ago, the movie Gravity. They're both a cartoon. 98% of the pixels that you're actually seeing in the movie Gravity are computer generated. They're no different from the Toy Story cartoon. All you get really is George Clooney's facial space, and you get Sandra Bullock's little area. And the funny challenge that you have is you're a viewer on the demand side. The suppliers need to make you think that you're watching actors hurtle through space that doesn't exist, obviously. How'd they do it? Well, they created a three-dimensional cartoon and sent it to about 3 different dimensions. They were able to control lighting on the actors by sending it to panels that surround projecting that environment on those panels around the actor. They're able to control the movement of the actor by hooking her or him up to a rig in a harness. And the funny thing is they were able to steal manufacturing robots out of the automobile industry and slide it around to reverse engineer the perspective of somebody sitting still to make you think somebody just got hurtled out into space. What's the supply side to your, I want to eat popcorn and be entertained demand for 2 hours? The funny thing about this, the reason why I bring this up is what's driven this advanced visualization over the past. We've seen examples of it. Some of you guys have invested in it. It takes a lot of smart people, some really hip kids that have multiple skills in visualization. It takes a lot of time. So the Toy Story in 2010, Toy Story 3, you can Google this on Wired magazine, 32 frames per second. Some of the detailed scenes took 24 hours to render that 1/32nd of a movie. That was 2010 technology. So it takes time. And the challenge is that's one way. If I sent it to the renderer and tomorrow it looked like shite, I'm going to have to do it over again because I can't reverse engineer it. And the funny thing is much like that 10,000 computing example that I talked about with my dog or Abraham Lincoln or the Buddhas, you actually can start virtualizing that knowledge, that specialist, and that capability in the platforms that they're running. And so what's really great about this notion of what's happening in media and entertainment and gaming is very parallel to what's all these investments that are happening in hardware, but the content that you have, you can print and you don't think about it. You can send to a 3D printer and you're starting to think about it. The funny thing is you can export immersion and give that onto the demand side of the equation. What if I immersed my client constantly and it wasn't a scarce resource? I can move some stuff around. I can do 50 of these. It took me a second to do one. This is the challenge. This is the disruption. That's the lens. So a lot of you guys are starting to look at, hey, there's this acceleration, this activity going on. It's not a hardware conversation alone. It's not even a software conversation alone. It's that kind of combination, and it's being impacted by all of these other dimensions that are hitting what it is that you're picking and clicking. It's fascinating. We talk about big data constantly. This is hilarious to me. This is 12 hours worth of work in Japan. The BIM existed, the GIS existed, this content was relatively accessible to the project team. This was just curating scores of content. and arguably giving insight to one of the most, I don't know, congested or traveled intersections in the developed world. This is downtown Tokyo Rail. And so it's kind of where I want to start to close for the night and allow you get out of your way from that very stiff drink that you guys now have thoroughly deserved. It's that difference from plan to perform that I really want to focus on. People will talk about data, people will talk about sensors. This is a different kind of lens. I love this example. This is actually an old example as well. This visualization isn't anything but tweets. And this begins to show you use that you never saw coming. This is a 30-day cycle in downtown Manhattan of all the people that tweeted and where they are that included a word sick in their tweet. And the challenge with that is, what does that mean? Are you sick of your job? Are you sick of your husband? Are you really sick? So that actually took some University of Rochester, that created a challenge for some researchers at the University of Rochester, where they started creating an algorithm to sift through all that data. They had position, they had all kinds of things, and if you actually look, they were able to figure out that one person who was really sick and be able to predict who else was going to get sick. And they did it with staggering accuracy. 8 days advance notice, 90% accurate, and she was the only one in the room that was really sick. That's big data. Your 4 DVDs to hand over is not big data. That's big data. Prediction that bridges that gap from plan to perform, learning how to manage it, that's your future. We talk about information is king in many different ways. I love what the writer, it takes sometimes Smithsonian, Twitter, flu. That's the only thing you should remember from tonight. Let me read this to you. We can think of people as sensors that are looking at the world around them and reporting what they are seeing and experiencing. If you're an executive in the room, do you want to know what's happening in the trenches? How do you want to know what's happening in the trenches? Is it just an app? Is it an annoying request for an iPad? The funny thing is, the simplicity of it all gets really powerful. We can build a small little app that basically just sits there and gives the superintendent an opportunity to go, did you finish today what you said you're going to do? Did you finish? Did you finish? Yes, done. Thank you, go away. Why didn't you finish? Raise your hand. Tell me why not. Root cause. Tell me when you are going to finish. 2 simple questions. Thank you, please go away. And that trapping, that's a tweet. What does that mean? Do I send that sensor back to my project manager? Do I notify a wider audience? The interesting thing as an executive, it's plan versus perform. I'm capturing every task every day, and it was 2 clicks, 1 to 2 questions. That's not very hard. I'm seeing the forest from the trees. I know my acceleration of productivity, and I'm not knee-jerk reacting to the 2 drops on the blue line this week that was a weather event that I'm going to burn some OpEx around and say, mobilize another crew, work Saturday, Sunday, I'll eat it out of contingency. I won't overreact. I'm looking at the gray bar. Plan versus perform. I'm no longer an extreme sports mountain biker. I'm riding a funny hybrid. It's interesting. We commissioned an artist to sit there and go, okay, let's create a nice visual slide that takes all these themes and throws it on the same project side. And it's incorrectly titled. It looks like a scene from the Jetsons. It vaguely looks like our industry. The irony is, with all of those components, they're just borrowed from somebody else that's deploying them right now. If you've actually listened to anything, I've yet to talk about the future. I've talked about 2011 and what's happened to here, and I splashed into Caesar's projects. I love the simplicity of economics. One of my heroes, Tyler Cohen, will stress, and I will stress, it's not about the tech. This is dense. Somebody's going to need to digest it, and it may need a serving of alcohol to do it. The problem is, what I don't see on the agenda, is what we are seeing out in industry, is what I think is really cool, is hopefully the next subsequent years, we're going to start seeing a lot of the technology that solves one of our most challenging metrics here. Lots of startups going in and investing in this space, and that's super great. But if I focus on those people, keeping them alive versus actually looking at who they are, those boomers that are leaving, like Gerald, my 82-year-old superintendent, if I clicked on the audio here, he'll tell you 40 years of experience. It took me about 10 minutes to go through this model and figure out what's happening with this air handler versus about 6 months of staring at some drawings. He's 82. In 2012, he didn't know what to do with an iPad. In 2010, I thought it was an oversized phone, so I wasn't too far behind him. If you look at Backward Tattoo Guy, Nate knows this guy really well. He's a drywall contractor. If you look at his desk, he's a millennial doing some amazingly disruptive things. Look for the drawing. You don't find one. It's a binder of his own work. He's got a three-dimensional model that he's looking at curating your design, and he's cranking out his own shop drawing so that he can go crank it out on site, which is right out the door. That's millennial juice that these guys are harvesting. And so I'm going to end with this. I've done this for about 10 years, and it's, again, just a lens for when you guys go back and look at your workforce, because you need some corrective lenses. These words aren't similar, difficult and complex. And if you go into medical science, this is actually coming out of therapy. The term difficult is subjective. It's qualitative. It's, I perceive this presentation to be difficult. You may not. You may thoroughly enjoy it. You may be drunk. On the other side of the equation is complexity. To do something, I may actually have to do more variables to accomplish the same task. What do I mean? So hygiene, dental hygiene. I can, swig some mouthwash, one task, one variable. I can brush my teeth, 3 to 5 variables, depending on how you do it. I can floss, about 10 different variables. All for dental hygiene, different levels of complexity. If none of those metaphors work, maybe this works for you. If you grew up and you have X or boom in your generational title, you're most likely on the left side of the equation, perceiving a lot of difficulty in this space. The interesting thing is if you're a millennial, and by the way, that's the majority of the workforce right now, and it's going to accelerate in the next 5 to 10 years, and I think the statistic is like approach 60 to 75% of the workforce being the right side of the equation. And this is the challenge, is your investments, your decisions are throttling the horsepower that you have on the right side of the equation, digesting from your view of the world. Computing is scarce. These things are difficult to do. And oh, by the way, you don't know my workforce. Well, I promise that I spend a lot of time with your workforce. This is dead week last year at Georgia Tech. These guys are wrapping up finals. These guys have already sprayed off their resumes. Construction management class, look at what they're doing. They're basically sitting there cranking out advanced applications of VR. What was interesting, I got to talk to James last week about technology, and back in the 90s when we started this desktop computing conversation, what was happening in education was divides away from what you guys were actually doing. And the funny thing is, it's almost crossing. What kids are coming out of school with: generative design capability, augmented reality techniques, sensorizing the world. Have you looked at any grad student work lately? They are far surpassed what at some point while we were sleeping, this happened in education. What's even crazier is that group of kids in Atlanta. I dropped off, I'm only here for 4 hours, kids, thanks for not killing me, and here's a cloud-based CAD tool. Use it on your next project if you can. I got an email from Ethan's father about a month later. He had a small little team, inner-city charter school team, going up against the entire state-funded school districts on an innovation competition. He had a design. He's like, hey, look, Ethan's prepped to send this thing to a 3D printer. Where do we get one? I was like, who's Ethan? And it was fascinating. Ethan was fearless. He digests complexity, and he just expects it. His demands are totally different. And what's fantastic is this article's about them crushing the rest of the state and winning the Innovation Award as that inner city charter school. Who's your workforce? It's fascinating. If you're an executive, this comes at a penalty. You know, our industry is already being penalized. Spent some time with workforce development, Mike Belliman here this week. You know, we can't find workers because they think we're in an industry that's not innovative. It doesn't look anything like the complexity that they were grown up on. And this is a premium. This is a challenge. I was fascinated by some friends at Laing O'Rourke. I tried to pick an example that doesn't compete with anybody. If you guys are overseas, I can't help you. But look at how they're recruiting. They're calling themselves a technology firm to find construction workers. Is that a bait and switch? What do you think the innovation footprint looks like at Laing O'Rourke to move around the UK market, to develop some of those crazy projects that are going on in the Middle East and crush it in Australia right now? This is the challenge. It's not a technology challenge in isolation. It's definitely a capital challenge, the human capital and what we're tied to and the physical inputs that we put into this industry. The bar on the left is just a ridiculous chart. It's how we shed workers across 50 states during the recession in 2008, 2009, 2010, and the green bar is our attempt to hire them back. If you look at where we were last year, we're still below water. So what's the supply side of the equation look like now? Do more with less? That starts to sound like a productivity conversation. I think you'll find that on page 2 of your pamphlets for the rest of the week. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it a lot.